A lot's happened in 2025, especially with the economy and tariffs. And I definitely feel for you. It's affected our clients, it's affected our business, but not in necessarily a negative way. Now, with a lot of these e-commerce stores kind of shrinking, falling off, having issues with the tariffs that are coming into play, I'm gonna go over how we are dominating with our clients that are hanging in there, taking market share, and actually growing instead of shrinking. In this video, what I'm gonna go over is what's happening in the e-com market right now, why stores with weaker foundations are falling off, why fewer competitors means cheaper ads, why and how you need to adjust your KPIs for sustainability, and then lastly, the most important, which is gonna be what signs you need to look for when it's time to scale. That being said, let's jump right in. So what's currently happening in the market is there's a lot of fear. And when there's fear, people make irrational decisions. We're just gonna write a big fear here because it does mean a lot with what's happening right now. But the caveat to that is there's not a lot of buying behavior changes in normal consumers. The stores that are hanging in there and creating sustainability with their products, instead of scaling backwards because they're afraid of what's gonna happen, are actually scaling out their stores. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that later in the video. But point being here is you do not want fear to take the wheel in this scenario, because if you do, you're gonna make a ton of reactionary decisions and it's gonna cause you to scale back and erase a ton of progress from your store. And then you're gonna have to rebuild up once actually things settle down. But in reality, if you create that sustainability, what's gonna happen is even if you plateau for a bit, other people who have that fear instilled in them, they're gonna make those decisions you almost made. They'll fall off, it'll make the market cheaper, and then it'll allow you to scale up into cheaper traffic. And when margins increase in the products that are coming in the stores, as long as traffic cost decreases, it's actually gonna balance out, right? Because as long as you're paying less to acquire a client, it doesn't matter as much on the cost of the actual item, right? Because the cost will balance out. Now, on top of that, we're actually seeing other competitors, especially for our clients, starting to scale down their ads. And what you'll see, even if you use tools like SpyFu, SimilarWeb, some of those different digital tools, you'll see their actual traffic go down for their store. And that's a telltale sign that they are doing exactly what I'm talking about. And also a lot of stores shut their doors completely because they think that there's not gonna be an end to the challenges that are coming right ahead. But in reality, the biggest thing is just sustainability in the meantime, because things will settle down. It's just a matter of outliving everybody else while that happens. And then you have kind of a blue ocean in your market because the other small stores fell off. Now, the reality of the market is if you did not have, or people in your market did not have, a really sustainable e-com store prior to this happening, those are the guys that are hurting the worst. Because if you're scaling with very, very low profit or having really shaky foundation to your actual store, what's gonna happen is once those tariffs come into play and you have less room for margin of profit in your business, it's pretty much going to eradicate the little profit that you had then. So the biggest stores that are hurting right now are the ones who scaled, didn't have any savings of cash really in their accounts. And then they could not hold that scale with the current profit margins that came into play when the tariffs came into play. So the biggest thing is, this is kind of a lesson for if you were in that situation. The biggest thing is if you were in that situation and you had that kind of upside down collapse, what you can really do is while you rebuild your store, you got to do it the right way. And that means scaling with some level of sustainability, but also building a really good brand behind the store. So when this does happen, you're not going to be one of the guys who just has to shut down and scale down their ads, right? And that all starts with how you build through the process. Now that gets into the juicier part of this video, which is how is it actually affecting the platforms when it comes to advertising? The first is going to be CPMs and CPCs. Now with CPMs and CPCs, I'll write that down real quick, PMs. What's gonna happen here is, depending on where you're showing ads, it's gonna affect things a little bit differently. Now, CPC generally relates most to search ads, which is gonna be a big, big portion of Google Ads. And Google Ads traditionally was built on an auction system. So a little bit different than the CPM system, which we'll talk about in a second, which is more of how Facebook operates. But when it comes to Google, built on an auction system for the PPC side of things, what happens is the more competition in the market, the more they're going to charge you per cost per click, because it's an auction system. It's whoever's willing to pay more, along a lot of other variables, which we won't really talk about in this video. But based off of the competition in the market, it's what people are willing to pay for that traffic, and that's what drives up the cost. And when you have an event like this that happens, essentially what's going to happen is the CPC goes down to a lower cost because there's less people in there that are willing to pay. And what's beautiful about that is that's going to give you a lot more profit in the sustainability of growing next to the increased costs of your product costs, which is what we're talking about. So it's going to even things out a little bit. And that's not going to be an instant process. What will happen is you will probably lose a lot of profit on the front end where you're trying to create that sustainability. But once more and more people fall off, and then you have that blue ocean to scale into, you're going to be able to scale with actual profit instead of having to rebuild right back to where all these other people are rebuilding from. You're just going to kind of hang in there. Everyone's going to fall off. You're going to lose profit in that phase. But once they fall off completely, you will have more margins that open up and allow you to scale. And it will make it a lot easier to scale because Google's going to see you as the authority in that section of scale in that market instead of having you rebuild next to everybody else. So very, very important to understand, because it's an auction system, it's what's going to affect along the lines of what we're talking about the most, which is going to be people falling out, making the traffic cheaper, and then obviously you being able to take more market share for a cheaper cost. Now, CPM is a little bit different because it's not as directly inflicted in that sense, because you have a little bit of a lag indicator when it comes to this, because CPM is really what the platforms are willing to charge you for 1,000 people watching your ad, right? Same way that Facebook works. And essentially what's going to happen is it's not going to be as direct as people just stopping bidding on terms, for example, like CPC, and then people falling off and you getting lower costs. What's going to happen is people are going to start turning off their ads on the CPM side, which with Google, it's going to be really YouTube, display, and some of those more visual elements, especially PMAX too. But once people start turning off their ads, that's when costs start going down, because the platform starts seeing, oh, people are no longer advertising. We're gonna have to make the cost cheaper to make it more attractive so they come back. And what you really wanna do is, like I said, kind of create that sustainability so you can hang in there. Once they make that decision, you're already at the top and you can keep scaling instead of climbing back from the bottom. So really, really important. The concept is simple. Really, at the end of the day, you're just trying to hang in there, make sure you can create some level of sustainability where you're not losing money, let everybody else fall out of the market, scale down their ads, turn off their ads, whatever they're gonna do. And then once costs come down, the tariffs ease up, you're already still high up there in the market to keep scaling. Now, we keep using the term sustainability, and a lot of that's gonna come into play with what's called KPIs, which if you're in the eCom space, you know what a KPI is, but it basically means key performance indicator. Most of the time that's gonna be cost per acquisition, ROI, things that are gonna be relative to what you're spending versus what you're making for the store. And if you don't have guidelines on the KPIs you need to hit, you're not gonna be able to make really good decisions. A lot of the times there's two KPIs that we really encourage people to keep in mind when they're scaling or building out their ads. One's gonna be your minimum ROAS for break even, really, which is a lot of the times gonna be somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5. If you have worse margins, it's obviously gonna be higher. If you have better margins, it's gonna be lower. But there's gonna be the other one, which is gonna be your minimum ROI to scale. Now that's different than minimum ROI because there's gonna be some level when you're testing where you're okay with breaking even, right? Just because you're getting data, you're gonna optimize down, it's gonna become more profitable. But when it comes to scaling, you're gonna have a little more fluff there because you know as long as you have that level of scale, you can keep increasing budget. Now with everything happening, and especially the numbers changing quite a bit with your costs, your margins, the tariffs that are coming into play, you're gonna have to increase these KPIs as far as the baselines, because if you go with the traditional ones that you were using before, which is gonna be your break-even ROI and then your scale ROI, you're gonna get to a point where if things don't go exactly your way, it's gonna actually knock you out of the park as well. So the most important thing you can do right now is raise those numbers a little bit, because you wanna have some level of fluff to account for the unpredictability in the market. Because if you're trying to operate how you were operating before, chances are if you reach and keep scaling, if something does change, you're gonna be in the same boat as everybody else who just fell off or had to shut down their ads or close their store, right? So what I highly recommend is increasing baseline KPIs. So when you do scale, if something unpredictable does happen, you have a little bit more fluff in the numbers to account for that happening. Otherwise, you'll be in a really dangerous position, especially if you have a lot of products moving or a lot of money moving through the ads. And then you have a really good idea of where you need to really hold the line as you see everybody else falling off through this whole process. And that goes into what to look for when it comes time to scale. Now, this is really gonna be the process after holding the line. And what we'll basically write down right here, hold the line. And then what's gonna come after that, which is gonna be the signs of scale. The biggest thing you're gonna be looking for is a decrease in traffic costs. We'll put a down arrow with traffic costs. And really what that's gonna look like is it's gonna mean cheaper CPMs, cheaper cost per clicks, depending on what campaigns you're running. And when those start decreasing, over most markets, they're actually seeing about a 25% decrease right now in the cost of actual traffic because everybody's doing what we're talking about. When traffic decreases, what's gonna happen is ROI will increase. Just because you have cheaper traffic, it's gonna make your profitability higher. And when that happens, that is pretty much go time for scale, because what's gonna happen is when your costs start decreasing on the actual traffic side and you have more profitability, and generally profit and ROI is gonna be an inverse lever against scale. You're gonna have more room to scale, and that's gonna actually persist, right? It's not gonna slow down because it's gonna be a very steep drop off of competitors in the market. You really, really wanna take advantage of scaling into that open market. And that's what we're doing with a lot of the clients that we have that have gotten past that level of sustainability in their actual direct market. So the best thing you can do is really hold the line, Wait till you see those key indicators of traffic costs decreasing. Once you see traffic costs decreasing, you're going to see your ROI in your campaigns increase. And really that's going to be the beginning of the end for the other stores, the beginning of the scale to your store. So make sure to go through that process, because if you don't go through the process, you're going to really reset the progress of your store and go through what all the other stores are dealing with right now. And if you do hold the line, it's going to be a beautiful part of the process for you, because once everything settles down, you're going to have so much more market share and so much more scale to your store than you had before. It's just going to be a little bit of a painful process through that process. But I promise if you get through it, it's going to be a really great year by the end of the year for you. So thanks for watching. If you want more information on how we actually build campaigns, the strategies we use, what we do for our clients to scale them, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Put any questions you have in the comments.